Welcome back to the Tour Today show. My name is Steve Fleck. Every day there is racing at the Tour. We will talk about the highs and the lows, the thrills and the spills, the tragedies and the triumphs at the Tour, aka Le Grand Boucle. On each episode of the Tour Today, I will have a special guest on the show with me. Today, my guest is the president of Polar North America. Prior to that, he spent 7 years as the director of sales and marketing at Cervelo. Welcome, Tom Fowler.
Thank you, Steve. Happy to be here.
Good to have you with us here on the show, Tom. Really appreciate your time. I know it's a busy time for you. Where are you joining us from? If memory serves me correct, it's somewhere on Long Island outside of New York City.
It is, yes. I'm joining you from my home here on Long Island in Garden City.
Fantastic. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in to watch this episode, the second last, the penultimate episode of the Tour Today show. Again, we're very pleased to have Tom Fowler on the show with us. You can find me on Twitter. That's probably the best spot for social media for questions, input, etc. You can find me at Steve Fleck. Tom, where's the best spot for people to track you down online or via social media?
Yeah, well, LinkedIn, I'm quite visible, but also on Instagram. Just it's Tom Fowler 1, the digit 1, and that's where you'll find me.
Okay. Wow. What a stage today, Tom. That was something extraordinary. It was a bit of a repeat of 1989, Le Mans versus Figno. This is Pogačar versus Roglic. 36-kilometer time trial with a tough 6-kilometer climb up to La Planche de Belleville for the finish. There was about a 20% ramp that they went up over the final 200 meters. This was a tough climb. It looked like the classic Canadian hockey stick, just ramped right up at the end. And the 21-year-old Slovenian sensation, he took 2 minutes, Tom, out of Primož Roglic to take the yellow jersey and the win in the Tour de France. He also wins the polka dot jersey and the white jersey. This was history in the making. What are your thoughts on all this drama?
Well, obviously an extraordinary performance by Pogačar, and you really have to give him all the credit because it's not like Roglic had a bad ride. I mean, he was fifth on the stage. I mean, he rode very well. Carlos Sastre was fifth in the final time trial that decided the Tour de France in 1988 and won the Tour. I mean, and that was a phenomenal time trial performance for a guy in yellow. So no disrespect at all to Roglic for going fifth. It just was, Pogačar just had the ride of his life.
Yeah, that was something else. But I mean, we knew this kid was special, and it's really, we have to sort of keep impressing on the fact that he's only 21. In fact, I think his birthday, he's 22. His birthday's in a few days, next week, I think it is. So almost 22 years old. He had shades of greatness last year when he finished third at the Vuelta behind Roglic, who won the Vuelta last year, and the great Alejandro Valverde just ahead of Pogačar. So we saw how good he could be sort of in a grand tour, but he comes to the Tour de France and everyone, talking about the fact that he was an overnight sensation. But I think the Vuelta results last year really proved that this kid's got some legs.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you could see his performance last year in the Vuelta really foreshadowed what is to be a phenomenal career. I mean, barring some horrendous crash or injury or bad luck, he's only just getting started. So yeah, it's not an overnight sensation. It never is. People forget about all the hard work that this kid has put in over the years. And when you watched him ride some of the earlier stages this year in the Tour, even those where he didn't take huge time, but where he was contesting for like time bonuses, you could see that he had punch and an attackability that others lacked. He would be following the wheels, and then he'd go into the final, and he could turn on the gas in a way that I was like, well, that's impressive for such a young guy to be able to do that so deep into the race on a mountain stage. So while I didn't think he was going to take 2 minutes out of Roglic in the final time trial, it doesn't shock me that he rode very, very, very well today.
Of all the contenders, Tom, in the top 10, we sort of shook everything out and we got down to sort of 10 riders that were kind of in the mix from about the fourth or fifth stage on, it was Pogačar who probably was the most animated. Now, he was forced to be animated because he got caught in that split on that stage, on the wind stage. I think it was stage 7 where the split formed, and he lost over a minute at that point in time. So he needed to get back time. But everyone else was, as you had said, was just riding on the wheels, riding very conservative, holding position. But he was the one that took the race, to the others, in the top 10. And we certainly saw that on the time trial today.
Yeah, no, for sure he did. And, what I really have a lot of respect for him on is maturity.
Yes.
He wasn't reckless. He wasn't just randomly, attacking, and then destroying his legs. Casey, can you close the door, please? Sorry, Steve.
It's okay. It's almost live, so we get it. Sometimes there's a dog walking through the camera on my shot. He's upstairs.
So the maturity that he showed, where he was certainly aggressive, showed a lot of panache, but he wasn't reckless. And it's a fine line between aggression and recklessness.
Yes.
Unusual over a 3-week stage race, especially for a young guy who gets himself caught out on a split, to not panic and to choose his spots properly, to expend energy, because of course it all adds up over 3 weeks, and to measure that effort in the right way over time. Very impressive. And obviously he had plenty in the tank left for today.
Yeah, for sure. I saw that too. I first saw it on the Parasword, where that was the first real significant challenge, that they had. This has been a crazy tour. We'll get to that in a second. It was almost like the Giro. There was like challenging stages right from the get-go. But the Parasword in the Pyrenees was the first time where he really went on the attack, and he set the all-time best, time up the Parasword from the base to put back some time, on the rivals there, and where he had lost the time on the split. But yeah, I agree. The poise, the panache, the patience. You'd see a Julian Alaphilippe, like Alaphilippe, always on the attack, just like going until his legs blew up. But you didn't see that with Pogačar. He waited. He played the poker game really well and waited till he almost knew that he could get the time that he wanted, even if it was 5 or 6 seconds or 10 seconds. He was just, chewing it back, every little bit. Let's talk about bike choice. Yesterday, this tour has been everything unexpected. I had Dan Bingham on yesterday on the show with me, and Dan's one of the top track pursuit riders in the world. Bronze medal at the UCI Road World Championships last year in the new mixed team time trial for Great Britain. Very good time trialist. And Dan was predicting that they would all go up the final climb on the TT bikes. Well, that went all out the window. I think other than Tom Dumoulin, every one of the significant players in the top 10 opted to make the change to the road bike at the base with 5K to go. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it was a big question and a lot of debate around that. To be honest, I wasn't surprised that most of the favorites, Dumoulin accepted, made the change. And here's why. And this just harkens back to some of the learnings I had from my time at Cervelo, where I spent a lot of time at the wind tunnel with pro riders, and then obviously with the teams figuring out strategy around positions and bike choices. So, this time trial was very unique because you had the 30K run in that was generally flat, but also, it was, the profile looked, quote, easy. It wasn't easy. There were a lot of false flats in there that can really chew at your confidence, but the speeds were very high. With the power these guys can put out, they're going really fast. So you have to be harnessing every aerodynamic gain you can over those 30Ks, which is going to take those guys roughly 35 to 40 minutes. Any compromise to aerodynamics is going to cost you dearly. We saw that, for example, in the tunnel when we had the Schleck brothers. This is back in the time that they were riding, and we were able, in the space of 1 hour, to find, just through small modifications in position for the brothers. I think Andy picked up on a 40K. We could arithmetically calculate about 1:15. No, it was Andy was 1:35 and Frank was 1:15. And that's just tiny adjustments in their position. So the compromise you would make to ride a road bike with clip-ons for 30K would be just like out the window. No way. So then the question becomes, so no question, you got to ride a TT bike for those first 30K. The question is, do you make the change?
Right.
And there really are a couple of drivers, and everybody focuses on the weight because, of course, a TT bike is heavier than a road bike. And fair enough. You know, if you're talking about maybe for a typical elite road bike versus TT bike, you're talking about 1 kilo to 1.5 kilos. And when you look at that in the context of the total system weight, rider and bike combined, it's maybe about 2%. Well, 2%, that translates almost directly into time. A 2% increase in weight in the system translated into a 2% increase in time. That's for these guys about 19 seconds. So you're gaining 19 seconds by making the change, minus, of course, the time to make the change. But perhaps of even greater consequence is the gearing. So on the flat time trial running, you know, they're going to be running, you know, they're going to be in the 11 and the 12 and the 13, 14 maybe. So they need that really tight gearing, but those those cogs are out the window once they start going up, you know, 8, 11%, you know, 20% at the end. They're having the gear selection in the climbing gears and being able to fine tune those climbing gears, perhaps of even greater consequence than the reduced weight. Obviously, there's a biomechanical efficiency and comfort and all that, but those two things, I think you're talking about 18 to 20 seconds on weight, but, you know, hard to calculate, but certainly very significant on simply the gearing that you would have available to you optimized for the flats versus the climbs. So correct. I think it made perfect sense. And of course, the favorites did really smooth bike changes. The loss of time in those changes was minimal. You know, I was surprised that Dumoulin didn't, but you know, he just wanted to maybe keep his rhythm. And ultimately, of course, that probably factored into some of the finished order on the stage as well. But yeah, pretty interesting how those calculations can be made to help drive the right choice on equipment setup on a complex time trial like today's.
I timed, actually, Tom, Richie Porte's bike change, and it was less than 5 seconds from the time, you know, he actually stopped on the road till he was rolling again after the mechanic gave him a push off. It was 5 seconds. They had obviously, that was orchestrated and timed everything, every movement, so that it was very smooth. It was 5 seconds for Porte. Great ride for Porte, though. It's worth noting. Yeah, he you know, at 36 years old, he's ridden himself up into the podium spot, you know, on, you know, overall in the race. So, you know, chapeau to Richie Porte. He's going to Ineos next year, where he'll probably be riding in a support role. And this was really his last sort of hurrah, maybe, for a shot at the overall, but he ends up third on the podium. Speaking of bikes, I know you're a bike guy. What do you think of two of the classic brands, like in cycling, you know, taking the win here? Colnago, you know, as a bike, the UAE bike sponsor, and Campagnolo. I think it's the only team that Campagnolo has sponsored, the classic Italian, you know, Gruppo, you know, company. Thoughts on a classic brand, two classic brands and iconic brands in the bike business taking the win here at the Tour de France?
Yeah, well, you know, I love to see it. You know, having you know, a little bit of gray hair, just like you do. You know, I remember many of my early bikes. You know, where Campagnolo was the only game in town. So you know, for the heart, it's nice to see the classic brands. But what it shows is how narrow the gap is in terms of technological superiority between, you know, the companies that have made it through the filter to be acceptable for a Pro Tour team. You know, and you know, you can look at reviews and this bike is stiffer, this is lighter, this is more aero, and so on and so forth. And fair enough, those differences do exist for sure, and likewise in drivetrains. But the margins have narrowed over the years. I would say in the time when I was at Cervelo in, you know, the 06, 07 timeframe, when it came to TT bikes, Cervelo was really markedly superior.
Yes.
That gap has closed in more recent years, and it's the same for all of them. So, chapeau to Colnago, one of the most venerable names, and I think one that maybe some folks have not thought about as being high performance, but clearly they're making a product that's worthy of top performance. It also goes to show, though, that that because those gaps in technological excellence are relatively thin, ultimately it's the legs.
Yes.
The legs have got to be there, and the gear makes, let's say, assuming everybody is making intelligent choices, is going to give you those marginal gains. It's going to give you gains, but ultimately, it's the engine that counts.
Correct. And the engine of the day was Tadej Pogacar. He rode away with this, a sensational win. Speaking of the bikes, Howard Chang, who was a guest on the show a few days ago, we did talk about this, how it's like the automobile business now. Everyone makes a great bike. Their top road bike, their top TT bike. There's probably not a dog that of any of the top brands that are supplying, bikes and equipment like to the World Tour teams. They're all pretty good. And it's just marginal gains, like a fraction of a percent here. And it's nice to see that it comes down to the legs, and the rider. Tom, what about Jumbo-Visma? How do you think they're feeling today? I mean, they threw everything at this tour. Every stage, they had riders well positioned, sending riders up the road. The team rode with phenomenal support, in that traditional tempo riding when the yellow jersey is being defended.
Looks like you hung up there a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Are we back?
You were saying about Jumbo, like just doing everything.
Yeah, they did everything. They even had 3 riders in the top 5, like on the final TT today with Dumoulin, Wout van Aert. Incredible ride for him for an all-rounder. And then Roglic in 5th, and they still couldn't, take the race to this young Slovenian rider, Pogacar.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you're Jumbo-Visma, I mean, on the one hand, you've got to be very, very disappointed, of course, for all the reasons you mentioned. On the other hand, you can kind of make your peace with it because you weren't the victim of a crash or a puncture or a team illness or some drama, that sabotaged your efforts. You had a great race plan. You had excellent preparation. You brought a great team to the tour, and they executed very, very well in all respects. I mean, where did they make a mistake? I mean, I can't figure out where it might have been. So yes, it's disappointing to not be on the top step of the podium, but on the other hand, you can live with that, knowing that we did everything and we rode a phenomenal race and we had a great result. Just not the optimal result. So much better than to be a victim of a crash or to feel like, oh, well, if only we'd done this or done that. You think about Ineos, I mean, they've got to be having a host of questions around like, well, what happened with Egan Bernal? And, what could we have done differently if we had brought Geraint Thomas, who did very well at Tirreno Adriatico? Would that have changed the complexion of what we might have achieved? I mean, albeit they won the stage the other day with, going 1-2, which was nice to see. But for sure, that's a team that's going back after Paris tomorrow with regrets.
Yes.
Jumbo-Visma, I'm going to doubt they really have much to regret. A little disappointment, but no regrets.
Yeah, I agree with you. It came down to the riders, on the team. They rode spectacularly, great choices strategically on every stage. The only thing that kind of let them down a little bit is that Roglic just looked a little bit off today, and that just being that little bit off was enough to, force him, back behind Pogacar on the stage. Before we move on, Tom, just overall thoughts, on the tour. I mentioned this thing. This was a tour unlike any in recent years for a wide variety of reasons. The lockdown, the pandemic, 2 months later in the season. We didn't know what shape the riders would be in. Very few racing days, in their legs when they got to the tour. The weather we thought the weather might be, terrible. And then the parkour. I mean, it was just every day was crazy. Very few little pure sprint days. transition stages that were really, really tough. And even on the, the flat stages, we saw, just crazy ass riding, for, green jersey points or intermediary sprints. What are your overall thoughts, on this exceptional 2020 Tour de France?
Yeah, well, first, of course, congratulations and well done to ASO for having figured out a way to put this race together and then pulling it off. So logistically, to have achieved that is remarkable. The second thing that's interesting is that I wonder to what extent the tightness of the race and the drama of the race, where everything was so closely contested on almost every stage, had something to do exactly with what you said, a lack of racing days preceding the Tour de France. So, more riders likely came into the Tour relatively fresh, relatively healthy, and with longer training periods prior to the Tour than they would typically have had if it were in July. So, those conditions may have, thankfully conspired to create what we've witnessed. Whether that means things to change in the future year, is another question. Everybody will, say, well, no, you got to keep the calendar the way the calendar is traditionally. But, great respect for what the organization pulled off, the teams as well to, abide by the rules. But I really wonder the extent to which an abbreviated calendar has actually produced a better event. To be honest, Steve, I've long been a proponent of reducing the number of race days that any one rider is allowed to do. Right. There are a variety of reasons for that. We know health and wellness. I think it does things to help discourage or decrease the motivation for people to, tamper with performance-enhancing drugs. And here we're starting to see an example of where maybe it's actually, putting on a more amazing event on the biggest stage. So,
I mean, the traditional season, if we go back like to last year, the professional sort of World Tour season is insane. I mean, they start in January at the Tour Down Under and so associated races in there. There's other races going on in South America, and it ends in, October. And these guys are racing 50, 60, 70 days, throughout the year. And it's extraordinarily sort of demanding. What do you think about the sort of a bit of a changing of the guard that we saw, this year? A lot of young riders, obviously Pogačar, the presumptive sort of winner, the best case example of that. But I'm thinking of someone like Mark Hirschi or Benoit Cosnefroy, who rode so well in the polka dot jersey early on. All these riders, a lot of the riders who and even Egan Bernal himself, the defending champion, he's only 23 years old. A lot of the riders that featured, in the stages, in the jersey competition, a lot of what was going on, they're all under 24 years old.
Yeah, no, it is impressive to see and refreshing. I think the sport needs that refreshment. These guys remind me a lot of what Rafael Nadal brought to tennis when he burst onto the scene. Panache, vigor, style. So it's wonderful to see that. You then ask the question of like, well, how is it possible? How are so many young guys performing at such a high level on a 3-week Grand Tour? A one-day race, that's something different. Yep. And I think what we're really seeing here is the benefit that riders are harvesting from truly proper year-round oriented programs, as opposed to programs that are oriented around brief training blocks that are geared towards, okay, now you got to peak for this, now you got to peak for this, now you got to peak for this. So improved training cadences and rhythms, a more scientific approach to training that has really allowed the riders proper recovery, whereas I think they just kind of got ground up. So this is allowing a young rider to mature into the demands that a 3-week Grand Tour requires much earlier in his career than perhaps 10 or 20 years ago, where, you kind of have to work your way into that kind of endurance fitness that maybe wouldn't really take full flight until you're even in your, mid to late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be very interesting to now see what are the career longevities of guys like Pogačar and Bernal. Like, are they able to maintain this level through their mid 30s?
Mm-hmm.
That remains to be seen. But it's, the drivers of their ability at this young age are pretty clear and really encouraging.
And final thoughts on the whole of the tour. I'm sure it made you feel a little good when you saw Cervelo via Team Sunweb get 3 wins. Sunweb took a bit of a different approach. They were going for stage wins here. They had no interest really in the GC or in any of the other jerseys. They made it clear at the outset that they were going for stage wins. Mark Hershey got 1, and Soren Craig Anderson got 2 for them, and riding Cervelo bikes in all instances.
It's fantastic to see. I have will have a soft spot in my heart for Cervelo, and frankly, Sunweb. When you look at it, they had those stage wins you just mentioned, but they could just as easily have had maybe 2 or even 3 others.
Mm-hmm.
Hershey had the crash, and a few other things, but they were positioned to have a really legit shot at 2, maybe even 3 more stage wins. So nice to see those guys doing well. And just I hope that we get a crack at this. Just to share a final thought for you, I'd love to see the data file on Pogačar and separately Roglic on the final time trial. The power, not only the power they were producing, but particularly the power relative to the heart rate.
Yeah.
My guess is that relative to threshold heart rate and threshold power, clearly Pogačar was riding much closer to both of those values. You can't ride to your absolute threshold power without being able to go to threshold heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is that what we saw with Roglic was, as you say, an off day where he just couldn't drive his aerobic system as hard as he is capable of driving it when he's a little fresher. And that would be evidence not only in the power, but we probably saw him just not being able to elevate his heart rate to levels that he might customarily be able to were he a bit fresher. So, I wonder if one day we'll be able to get a look at those data files, but it would be fascinating to see how they work, because both the power and the heart rate are still such important drivers of the training and the performance for these guys. It's the ultimate measure of what somebody's capable of, even still today.
Hold that thought. I'm going to come back to that in a second with you, Tom. Just want to quickly talk about tomorrow. It will be the final stage. It's really ceremonial. They'll do the champagne, they'll take all the pictures and whatnot. But then the sprinters, as they normally do, will battle it out on the Champs-Elysees. Peter Sagan's already conceded, at least in terms of what he said to the press, that he's conceded the green jersey to Sam Bennett. But I never know if Sagan's joking or not. So he's a true champion. I'm sure he'll come out swinging tomorrow. He'll want to win the stage over Sam Bennett. Who do you see winning it on the Champs-Elysees tomorrow? What's your pick?
It's the easy one. It's the cop out. It's the cop out pick, but it's hard not to pick Sam Bennett.
Okay. All right.
He has shown his dominance. He doesn't show signs late in the tour of lacking punch. Mm-hmm. And I'd be surprised if he didn't really hunger for that win, just to validate in the most important sprinting stage of the Tour de France. Mm-hmm. To just validate for the whole world to say that like I am the man.
Right.
Sprinters have huge pride.
Yes.
And I mean this with all, the compliment. They have big egos, even if they're gracious gentlemen. Mm-hmm. As these guys are, but those guys hunger to get their nose in front of the other guy like no other athletes in the world. Yep. Bennett's going to be like laying it down. And I think it's a sprint that actually favors him, on the cobbles, a little bit uphill. Mm-hmm. It's a very good sprint for him coming off that corner around, the Place de la Concorde and then up, and then the slight uphill. That's a tough sprint, and it favors a sprinter like him as well. So I put my money on Sam Bennett.
I'm going to complete the fairy tale tour for UAE. I'm going to go with Alexander Kristoff. Wins the first stage, wins the final stage. Pogačar goes away with the 3 jerseys, the yellow, white, and polka dot. So that's my choice, Alexander Kristoff for the win.
I'd be happy to see that guy on the top step of the stage as well. He has been an absolutely phenomenal sensation, and so young.
Yeah.
I love the way he rides, the style in which he wins.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way the racing should be, and it would be great to see him actually win on the Champs-Elysees. I wish him luck in the final.
Okay, so you mentioned training technology there, Tom. Of course, now with Polar, you're sort of in the driving seat of a lot of what's going on, on the cutting edge of training technology. Where is training technology at right now? You mentioned some of those parameters there, like the linking up of heart rate and power and how that relationship is so important now. Polar's always been, a pioneer. They were like truly a pioneer with wearables a long time ago. The first heart rate monitors commercially produced and people using them. Where are we at with sort of training technology now, and where's it going?
Yeah, no, great question, and you're right, Steve. Polar was the first true sports wearable technology back in the 80s. I think you and I probably had our first monitors back in like 81, 82. I certainly did. So we've come a long way, baby, since then, as the saying goes. So what we're seeing now is not only tremendous accuracy in the measurables that matter to a cyclist, heart rate, power, and then obviously all the GPS related metrics, but a more comprehensive 24/7 capability to truly understand not just what is the athlete doing in training, in competition, but what about the other hours of the day?
Mm-hmm.
What is not only how much did they sleep, how well did they sleep, but in the case of Polar, for example, we're measuring the degree to which the autonomic nervous system
mm-hmm.
has actually recovered as something distinct from did you sleep well?
Yep.
And we're seeing now the intersection between training load and intensity and overnight rest and recovery via multiple different modalities for testing for that, not just monitoring, but actually testing and evaluating for that. And then being able to come out the other end of that 24/7 analysis with specific recommendations that a exercise physiologist or sports scientist or coach can incorporate into their program for their athlete on any given day.
Mm-hmm.
Not very many years ago, meaning like 3 or 4 years ago, those coaches and trainers that were guiding the athletes ultimately with their daily program were flying to a large degree blind. They knew what the athlete had done, but they only knew what the athlete had done. They had no way to understand the other, say, 18 to 20 hours of the athlete's day, mm-hmm. and how their system was responding. So it was as much art as it was science. Now there can be a lot more certainty brought into the mix. So that's a major shift in not only driving more precision in training and better race performance, but also really the health and wellness of the riders. Mm-hmm. Because people who are guiding them are able to know when they're starting to move towards burnout or overtraining much earlier than they might have in a former day. The other really interesting frontier that is yet to be fully explored that I think we're going to see in cycling in just the next couple of years is real-time aerodynamics. Mm-hmm. So there are companies that are nascent but just coming to market, like Ghibli Tech. You may have heard of these guys. I think they're also a Canadian company. GIBLI, I believe, is the way you spell it. So having real-time, accurate measurement around aerodynamic drag, and then being able to intersect. Okay, if I improve my position and become more aerodynamic, am I decreasing my power output? But is my drag going down so much that it's worth it to decrease my power output and suffer a little biomechanical inefficiency? So right now, today, until you're in the wind tunnel, which most of us don't have access to at $800,000 an hour, it's hard to know. And it's hard to know in real world conditions where you have crosswinds and all that sort of thing. So I think what we'll see with companies like Ghibli Tech is the intersection between power output, aerodynamic efficiency, and heart rate. And that when that matures and becomes an actionable intersection of those three values, I think you'll start to see performances go up yet to another level. So that's exciting to keep an eye on over the next couple of years.
Wow, fascinating stuff. You've been watching the Tour Today show. My guest today has been Tom Fowler, the president of Polar North America. Tom, thank you for taking this time to talk with us.
It's been a pleasure, Steve. Thanks so much, and best of luck to you and the team for the last podcast tomorrow.
Tomorrow, it's coming up. Tomorrow, stage 21, the final stage of the 2020 Tour de France. My guest will be back for a second time. He's one of the Flow Bikes commentators. He's the voice of the UCI Mountain Bike World Cup Series. My good friend Randy Ferguson will be joining me on the wrap-up show tomorrow afternoon, the final day of the Tour de France. I'm Steve Fleck. On behalf of the whole team at Endurance Zone TV, thank you for watching, and we will see you all back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for the final episode of the 2020 Tour Today show for this year's Tour de France.